Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching this video. I'd like to welcome you to our panel, The Future is Circular, How Companies Can Work Together on Circular Supply Chains. My name is Michael Sadowski. I am the Executive Director of the Circulate Initiative, and we are a nonprofit working to solve the ocean plastic challenge and build more circular and inclusive economies. I will be the moderator on this panel today, and I have the great pleasure of welcoming four panelists that are really leading the charge on the circular economy across four different very industries. We have Renee Morin, the Chief Sustainability Officer of eBay. We have Michael Levine, the Vice President, Chief Sustainability Officer, and Managing Counsel at Under Armour. We have Bob Teasley, Director, New Product Development, Supply Management at MillerKnoll. And we have Josh Choi, Chief Executive of Flowship, which is also an event sponsor. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we will hear from our four panelists about this concept that is the circular economy. And we'll hear from each of them about their take on what that means for them personally and for their companies. And we'll touch upon a number of topics in the circular economy, including the role of product design, the role that consumers play in the circular economy. We'll talk about the sort of policies that would enable a faster shift towards the circular economy. And we'll also talk about the need for collaboration. Each of these companies has experience working with others in their sector and across other sectors to drive the circular economy. And so we're really pleased that you joined us today, and I'm really looking forward to this panel. So to kick this off, and as I mentioned, the title of this panel is The Future is Circular. And I think we all hear this term circular economy, and maybe we have different takes on what that means. And so, Renee, I'll start with you, and I'd love to hear briefly from you what that term means at eBay, and to kind of ground this. If someone that was not on your sustainability team or not familiar with this concept, let's say your CFO or someone new to the company that had no idea of what this means, how would you describe the circular economy first, and then number two, what does that mean for eBay?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me. Well, I actually do report up to our CFO, so we'll use a different example within the company. For eBay in particular, we sit in the middle of the circular economy. So when we talk about the circular economy, what we're trying to do is to close the loop so that the things that are made at the beginning of life don't end up in a landfill at the end of life. We want to extend that life. Where eBay plays really is in re-commerce. So that's that loop within the loop where goods can have a second, third, fourth life by being resold and not being automatically replaced by a new good. And so through that, obviously, there's some really good sustainability benefits as well as economic benefits. And that's the sweet spot for eBay, is really being in the re-commerce business.
Excellent. Michael, same question to you. How do you define circular economy to maybe not your CFO if that person already knows what that means, but to a new person, and what does this mean for Under Armour?
Thanks, and great to be here with you and with our panelists, and thanks to Economist Impact. I would say in the apparel and footwear industry, a circular economy means moving away from the traditional linear model. And I might just say new stuff from new raw materials, or take, make, and waste, where you're extracting materials from the earth, making them into products that are then used by customers for a limited time and then eventually discarded. I think today about 85% of clothing produced, for example, ends up in landfill or is incinerated. That's from the US EPA. What we're aspiring to do is to move to a model where existing products or elements of them are circulated through reuse, repair, or recycling. So not only would products that we make stay in use longer, but companies can deliver new and innovative products to consumers with the smaller draw on what we all know are scarce or limited resources. At Under Armour, our approach to addressing circularity and sustainability challenges is largely driven by innovation. Specifically, we're focused on performance-driven innovations that our athletes and consumers expect of our brand, with improved durability and sustainability attributes. So we try to make a durable product that solves a performance challenge that our athletes need to solve.
Excellent. Bob, over to you. Circular economy, and what does this mean at MillerKnoll?
When I think about the circular economy, what I think about is that basic understanding that everything we have, everything we use, everything we do has value, and it retains that value throughout its life, and that life should continue to find a way to go forward. So if you think of a product that we make or a thing that we do, as we use it, as Michael talked about earlier, we use it and it gets towards the end of our use. How do we take that value back out, put it into new products, new uses, and new ways? Relative to our company, our founder said over 70 years ago, we'll be good stewards of our environment. And so when we think about the things that we do, being a good steward of the environment is finding ways, like we said, at end of life to have those products find new value, whether that be through donation or recycling efforts or other things like that, and or finding components, finding materials that we can use within our products to again create value for someone else's end of life components.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob. And Josh, last but not least.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks to Con. Yes. For Flowship, it almost can be considered a higher calling with how important the flow of goods is with a circular economy. We're trying to be the connective tissue between the different disparate companies in the supply chain. So we're uniquely positioned to encourage and to really enable our clients to really think circular, right? The brands themselves, whether it's packaging, the use of eco-friendly delivery options, and very importantly, efficiently returning used goods back into the supply chain fold. These are super important parts of the fulfillment side of the supply chain. And it's our calling to connect all the different parts to make it work and to really enable the clients themselves to have like the confidence to really push for circular economy, especially on a product design level. Earlier, Michael just now mentioned about moving from a linear supply chain into a more circular one, and that's getting those goods from the consumer back into that supply chain is one of the most important links in that circle.
Excellent. And we'll talk a bit later about the role of logistics and shifting from this linear approach to a circular one, but I appreciate that. Great. So that was a great first round of thoughts on the circular economy. Bob, I want to come to you, a role of product design. And obviously, MillerKnoll is a design-oriented company. And I want to hear your thoughts on the role that design can play. I mean, this is the starting point of the product that, as you described, eventually you're trying to figure out what to do with those materials and inputs that go into that product. So tell me more about how product design fits into the circular economy at MillerKnoll.
Yeah, so when we think about it, the standard axiom, if you will, form follows function. And we get into our early stages of new product development in the design intent. When we begin that conversation, one of the sorry about that. One of the steps we talk about is aspirational goals at design intent. What do we aspire to do when it comes to our sustainability goals? What level of recycled content, what level of carbon footprint do we want to have? Those goals help then begin to define the product. And we have to think about it that way. Historically, it would be more of the view of how do I figure out what the function is, what performance characteristics does it have, and what form do I want it to take. We get all of that work done, and then we say, oh, how can I shoehorn in a material to try to make it work? By doing this earlier in the process, by thinking about those aspirational goals for sustainability, we begin to think of that as another attribute and something that we have to consider. You know, whether it be in the world of plastic wall thicknesses or different things to accommodate greater variation in terms of materials. That's how we utilize our design teams, our external designers, our internal designers, how we use them to help us influence that form and function based on the criteria of sustainability and circularity.
And Bob, can you give us an example of a product where your design team rethought how you assembled that product or you designed it from the start with circularity in mind?
I can go to one that's older and then I'll go to one that's newer. When we
Yeah.
think about the Mira chair as an example, when that was introduced a number of years ago, 20 years ago actually, um, one of the things that we get into is design for disassembly. So that idea, historically, again, we would look at a product and say, how do we assemble it? How do we make sure that product is rock solid and never comes apart? Well, you have to thinking, and you have to begin to think about um, fastener locations and things like that so that people can get at them so that they can disassemble the product. Where maybe in the past we would have said, how do we hide them all? How do we make sure nobody can find if you've ever tried to take apart an automotive product, as far as working on something, it's like, where is that last fastener that I can't quite get at? They do a wonderful job as well. But in our case, you have to think about that. Recently, as we were working on some of our other products and looking at some of the launches. We had a chair just come out just last week. And in those early discussions, it was like, what do we want to have in there? What type of material? And so as we design around, in this case, it was an ocean bound plastic. As we design around that, it's taking a look at that cover and saying, how do we make sure that it can accommodate full variability? How do we add texture to it? So that it maybe hides some of the flaws that may come in? How do we do different things to make sure that product will function and meet the customer's demands for function, while at the same time meeting our demands for increasing our overall recycled content?
Excellent. And Bob, just to plug Miller Knoll, you've been one of the companies that's been a driving force behind Next Wave Plastics, a consortium of
Yes.
companies working to solve the ocean plastic crisis. So I think that's great. And Bob, you mentioned designing products that are lasting, that are built to not fall apart. And Michael, obviously, footwear for athletes, you want that thing to stay together, right? You want it to be high performing. So how do you think about design at Under Armour and putting together an incredible shoe, but also like at the end of life, whether it's apparel or footwear, what's the design process look like for you around circularity?
Sure. Yeah, so I would say, first of all, the design phase is typically the earliest point where intervention happens, and a phase where we can really take steps concretely to try to reduce impact on the environment. And in that phase, what we have to consider is the value that we're delivering through our products and any associated trade-offs in terms of the impacts from those decisions before we put resources behind them. So the questions we're going to ask is, first of all, how is this product going to improve athletic performance? How do we improve its durability so it can stay and play longer? And how can we carve out as small of an environmental footprint as possible? Here also, this is an opportunity where we have to weigh our choice of materials, assess chemistry through the lens of coating and finishes, consider, for example, garment style and construction choices that not only ensure a product's durable, but it serves a purpose. And here it's always to make you better. That's our goal at Under Armour. Let me go to a couple of examples. Many apparel products that are attractive to each of us as consumers and our end consumers for their look, feel, or function can have negative environmental impacts. So a fabric like fleece is more likely to shed microfibers. And the thing that many of us love about fleece, the feel itself, is a construction that lends itself over time to shedding. Water-resistant finishes can be harmful to local environments. And then we have the problem we call the monstrous hybrid of blended fabrics, specifically those that contain elastane, can pose challenges to recycling. So we have to think about, when we build it, are we building something that performs well, but then can't be put into a circular economy? So specifically, we try to align desirability, performance, and sustainability. And I know you've talked about plastics and microplastics. The things we've looked at is, how do we address the shed rate of fabrics through redeveloping or discontinuing high fabrics? And we tie that work to some of our published sustainability goals, one of which is a very big goal to have 75% of our products made of low shed fabrics by 2030. To help achieve that goal, we've worked to develop a fiber shed testing measurement that we think can be what we call sometimes a good for the commons. It's something that is scalable, it's affordable, and could be used beyond our company, beyond where we have direct influence. So the bottom line here is that in each of these cases, innovation is key to finding more sustainable solutions without ever compromising what's most important, we think, to our athletes, to our customers, which is performance attributes that they come to us for.
Great. And the issue of microplastics, obviously, it's a super thorny and complex challenge, and a quite timely one with treaty negotiations happening in Paris for the Global Plastics Treaty. So really, really great to hear that. Renee, so eBay, I mean, I could say that eBay has probably been in the circular economy from the very beginning, right? You're a re-commerce platform. I'd love to hear over the years that you've been in existence, like, and this is a big question, but like, what are the insights you've gathered from your work and from your existence? For example, like, are there particular product categories that do well on a re-commerce platform? Are there things that consumers come to eBay for and don't go to other platforms? But I'd just love to hear what you've learned in your life of being a leader in the circular economy.
Sure. And I also will give a shout out to what was Herman Miller. I visited their facility 20 odd years ago for my job as we were transitioning to a new office. And I think that was part of what sparked my whole journey in sustainability. So really nice to be here on the same panel with Bob. So with regards to eBay, yeah, we've been around since 1995. The very first item that was sold on eBay was a broken laser pointer, which is odd. Why would you sell a broken laser pointer? Well, Pierre Omidyar, our founder, wanted to create a platform where things could also have a second life. So somebody bought that broken laser pointer and fixed it, and it didn't get thrown away. So we really have been in this business for close to 30 years now, and is the backbone of our e-commerce portion of our business today. We, about 3 years ago, started surveying our buyers and our sellers around e-commerce in particular, wanting to understand what drives them. One of the things we found over those last 3 years, those surveys, is that e-commerce is here to stay. I mean, we've gone through the pandemic, and so we know an e-commerce had a big uplift in sales during that period, but it hasn't dropped off. E-commerce in particular, for our sellers, they have stated that over 80% of them have seen their sales stay the same or increase over the last 6 months in e-commerce. So that's getting through the pandemic, as well as some pretty thorny economic situations that we're still, combating today. And e-commerce has not been dropping. So really, really pleased to see that as a sustainability professional as well. Some other findings, Gen Zs are more likely to participate in e-commerce because of sustainability, but also because of making extra cash. So if you go on eBay, it's a open, equitable platform. Anybody can get on there and find things around their house that they want to sell. Some of those early sells actually turn into many businesses. And so those businesses can continue to grow, which we find really exciting. We call those our accidental entrepreneurs. And sustainability is important as well. It's not the number one reason, and that's totally fine. Things that are good for your pocket can also be good for the planet. I think that's a really good cross-section of sustainability, to be quite frank. We've seen that over 93% of our surveyed sellers in the last survey stated that sustainability was either somewhat or very important to why they participate in e-commerce. So that gives a little bit of a flavor of where things have been and where the trend is, which is here to stay. Getting back to your question around what types of goods, I think people tend to think about clothing, like this is a e-commerce shirt, straight off, and electronics, right? If you don't want to buy a brand new cell phone, you could find one that's used. But honestly, on eBay, you can buy just about everything. So we see a lot of e-commerce happening in parts and accessories for motors, or cars, we call it eBay Motors, as well as for home goods, little electronic things that you have in your kitchen, like your blenders, things of that nature, all the way to media, books, etc. So it's not just one category. I think we tend to think it might be sort of skewed one direction, but really at the end of the day, it's all based on trust. And that's something we work really hard on in our platform, because we don't make the products. And that's exactly why you asked the question of Michael and Bob about design, right? They're much further up into that process. What we are able to do is help to incentivize and provide a platform on which people can give items a second life and get a little extra cash or save a little extra cash, depending if you're buying or selling at the same time avoiding landfill and avoiding carbon emissions. So it's a really
Yeah,
great story to get in the middle of that with re-commerce.
excellent. Renee, does eBay have that broken laser pointer somewhere in like a
We
museum
do.
or something? Yeah, awesome.
It's at
That's
Main
amazing.
Street. Mhm.
Amazing. Um, Renee, I'll ask you this question, and then I'll come to Bob and then Michael around the role of consumers. I think we hear often that about consumers' interest in sustainability, and obviously they play a role, whether it's bringing back a product or engaging on a e-commerce platform. Like, again, broad question, but like, what role do you see the consumers playing in a circular economy?
I mean, consumers are obviously paramount to the circular economy. We're all consumers of something or some other item basically every other day or every day. So, what we need to do, I think, as companies is not put the onus on the consumers
Yeah.
to make all the right decisions. We need to educate. We need to make sure that these choices are easy, to be able to make meaningful choices. I worked as a consultant many years ago with a retailer, and one of the things that we were trying to do with them is to make sure there were no bad choices on the shelves.
Yeah.
So I think of e-commerce like that. If we can get to the point where there is a viable option for a new product that is used, then we're really incentivizing the circular economy at the crux of re-commerce. So it's really about us making it easy for the consumers to make those choices and educating them along the way.
Yeah, Renee, and I assume that's that concept of choice editing, that you're removing the bad choices and just making it frictionless for consumers to actually do the right thing and not expecting them to understand where to put this particular type of plastic in the recycling stream or what to do with a particular product. It's hard enough for people that spend their full time in this space to understand the attributes of
Right.
things. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Michael, what about for you in Under Armour's experience around the circular economy? What how do you engage consumers? What role do we want them to play in your circular economy efforts?
Also, I want to kind of second what Renee said, how important the educational role that brands play. It's really tapping into in a consumer segment the reasons why sustainability is important to them, or maybe a chance to be in a dialogue with them about why it should be important to them. And I think there's untapped potential, for example, in apparel, for example, in a dialogue around care, because that's where some impacts happen. So if you wash things in cold water and if you have the ability to hang them to dry, I think that's an opportunity. And then you have to recognize that your consumers are different, and then you have end consumers and you have wholesale account consumers, and their considerations can align or can be different. Some of them want information about sustainability. So how do you do that effectively? Where would they consume that? And what you make about how to communicate that can have environmental impacts as well. So maybe moving away from physical hang tags or other things like that, some digital opportunities there, and then using social media and other opportunities to communicate with them. And I think in addition to other means of communicating, sometimes there are white papers or your sustainability impact report for many of our companies.
Yeah.
You can partner with third parties, and that's where I turn to a partnership that we have and continue to have with the Nature Conservancy in California, where we partnered on a piece that was in GreenBiz, speaking about the urgency of addressing the microplastics problem. So finally, I would say you have to meet the consumers where they are. A lot of where they learn about brands, where they get excited about brands occurs in social media, and then of course, the news and through e-commerce sites. I think if we want to engage consumers effectively, we have to meet them where they are, try to tap into what they find most important. And I'd end on the notion that in doing this for a long time, I've seen many, many studies and meta studies about what motivates consumers. Sometimes they're just an expectation that you do these things, but there is often cited a gap between intention, behave in a more virtuous way, right? So, but then the gap between action, I think we have to be mindful of how we can help align together on an outcome that's good for our planet.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And Bob, to you, and maybe for you, it's maybe customers and consumers, right? Whether it's companies that buy your products, like what role do they play for you, and how does that look for MillerKnoll?
You think about MillerKnoll and our 19 brands, we like to say we are where you live. So we deal with customers both in the contract office furniture industry, which some people may traditionally think about us, but we're also the other end in the retail spaces through BWR, Holly Hunt, and places like that, or brands like that. So I kind of want to build on what Renee and Michael said, that idea of number one, education. How do you put out there what you're doing? How are you transparent about what you're doing? Honest, building trusts so that when you do it, it's like, hey, this is what what we're trying to accomplish and what we've been able to so far. And then also an earlier comment that was made about value. And so through that communication, through that education, we help customers understand what they value and where they can go get it to value, that product. Sometimes historically, if it's always been performance or something, in terms of how long it's going to last, by educating them on where they're at and saying, this is what we can do. This is how you can get what you want that is virtuous, as Michael said. Then they begin to look and say, oh, maybe I should shift the pattern. Maybe I should buy something a little bit different. Maybe I should be willing to spend just a little more money. Sometimes is the situation. We try not to make it that way, but those decisions we help them understand and help them make.
Excellent. Great. So, Josh, coming to you, we've talked about product design, we've talked about consumers, and a few other topics. I once had a colleague at Nike who said to me that the recycling portion, whether it's chemical recycling or mechanical recycling, is the relatively easy part of textile recycling. It's really the logistics that need to be figured out. How do you get a garment from an individual or a retailer to one place where it might get collected and sorted to another place? But that same dynamic plays out for any type of product. So, Josh, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the role of logistics in the circular economy as really the glue that brings all these pieces together.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Michael, I think getting that product from the consumer's hands and back into the supply chain is the most important circlet to creating that circular economy. And one of the biggest difficulties is for a lot of brands is to get to that economically viable place with the volume to make that work for their brands and stuff. And the logistics industry at large can help to make that more easily done for a lot of these brands if they are not, for example, a Nike or Under Armour. Furthermore, the tracking and identifying the goods flowing through the global system is also extremely important in making sure that the materials within the goods can be recycled and also identified, right? Like knowing whether it's a virgin material or already recycled material would change how you want to handle that. And of course, but to be able to confirm that as well, you need the inspection of these goods at a site close to the consumer for decision making of whether or not this is a reusable material, which will likely need to send this back to the manufacturers, which frequently is on the other side of the world. So we don't want to make too many redundant deliveries like that. To also do that efficiently, we need to use data to optimize routing both for products going into the consumer's hands and out, is also key to making it commercially viable. I mentioned a lot on data just now as well, but one of the most difficult things in logistics is how to get a product from manufacturing facility into the hands of consumers might need to take almost on average 11 different companies, from trucks to couriers to warehouses. Now, how do you track a product through all of that, right? How do these companies share data and play nice with one another? It's one of the hardest aspects, and one that companies like ours have been working really hard to solve and to enable that efficient and commercially viable circular supply chain. And getting all these companies to talk to one another is so important to making that happen.
Right. And Josh, I mean, this example that you're giving with 11 companies involved, I mean, does that fundamentally need to change when we think about a circular future? And also, does the sourcing model need to fundamentally change? For example, your average apparel company might be growing cotton in the U.S., sending it to one country for spinning, another country for dyeing, another country for fabrication. So do these things just need to fundamentally change in your view going forward?
Not necessarily. I think that's probably one of the easiest ways to improve things right off the bat. But usually, different companies, different countries have different things that they are better at, and it might not always be the most efficient and sustainable way of doing something by doing it all within a certain area.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
think in terms of probably making sure those 11 companies actually talk to one another and to really streamline that approach is probably more important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really important point, Josh, that certain countries do things better than others, right? And Josh, technology. I want to ask you about some of the things we hear. I mean, gosh, I don't think you can go to a sustainability or circular economy conference and not hear, blockchain cited or other kind of buzzwords in this space. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the role of technology. What do you think is promising in this space of the circular economy versus what is maybe further out to be developed?
I think blockchain definitely has been spoken of for quite some time in this space. Now, I think its benefits are obvious in terms of being a public and transparent ledger that can help track the items that I mentioned and the materials very publicly. Getting everyone onto the same ledger would be the solution to that difficulty I mentioned about having these companies all talk to one another. But getting them onto that ledger is probably the hard part as well, right?
Yeah.
So, but by having one that is publicly seen can be pivotal in building that trust that Renee mentioned as well earlier among the top companies, among the brands, and among the consumers to push for a viable circular economy.
Great. Excellent. So a question to all of you, and this will be a quick one as we kind of wind down the panel. I'd love for a specific example of how you're collaborating, whether it's within your sector, with a particular NGO, or a peer in the space of the circular economy. I think collaboration is another theme that we hear a lot about, right? Companies talk about this need for collaboration and other derivations of that word. But give me an example of how you're collaborating around the circular economy. Renee, I'll start with you.
Great. Yeah. And just a quick plug for needs for improvement in transportation, going back to Josh's 11 different stages for a supply chain and being in e-commerce. It's a really big part of our carbon footprint and one that we need collaboration to focus on and to do better in as well. So I'll just quickly mention a fun and really successful collaboration we had in the UK with Love Island UK. I actually have watched the show. I don't know if others on this panel have, but basically what we did is collaborate with Love Island to promote re-commerce, to promote these unique finds of clothing that were actually on the participants of the TV show. And it got a lot of buzz and a lot of interest. And hey, thrifting and vintage clothes are cool. So it was a really great collaboration for us.
That's fantastic. I think I saw a recent study that Unilever did that they looked at drivers of sustainable behavior by consumers, and influencers, I think, was the number one driver. So actually getting people that you care about to actually show you was the most important thing. So I think that's spot on, Renee. Bob, how about you? An example of collaboration?
You had mentioned it earlier. As a member of NextWave, you got a bunch of like-minded companies coming together, trying to help address this problem of ocean-bound plastic. And when I think about collaboration and how that one works different than maybe some other ones that we've had in the past, in order to do true collaboration, you have to have transparency. So you have to be willing to come together with competitive companies. We have a competitor of ours. We have other companies that are part of this consortium that are competitors of each other, but you come together for the greater good. And often we worry about our intellectual property, and we worry about, well, if I create this, how am I going to get value out of it and keep others from having it? And when I think of NextWave, we've launched products, we've shared suppliers, we've shared supply chains, we've shared information about material. We share all of that together in such a way to say, here's what I'm doing. How does this help you? How does this maybe give you either insight into what you're doing and or an opportunity to help us build these sustainable supply chains. So that one's been a lot of fun.
Great. Excellent. Josh.
I think the ethos of Flowship is to be the connective tissue among all the disparate companies. logistics. Like, well, a lot of the fulfillment companies, they do what you mentioned earlier in terms of how they try to do a lot of it by ourselves and to really shrink that those 11 companies down to lesser number of them. But Flowship is trying to work with all these different companies, and by being that connective tissue, we are positioned to work with these parties to optimize the flow, to do tracking, to promote data sharing. And when we put all this in front of our brands, our clients, they're able to then really have that confidence to move on to the product design flow, for example, to think about how they could do more circular economy.
Great. And Michael, lastly, an example of collaboration at Under Armour.
Well, in a nod to our host, Economist Impact, I wanted to give a shout out to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, whom we're working with, as well as textile recyclers and fiber manufacturers. EMF does exceptional work bringing together companies and giving them practical and actionable tools they can work with to reduce impact. And here I'd cite work on design principles, which have informed Under Armour's circular design principles that we're rolling out internally. And second, back to kind of material selection and construction, we're working to address blended fibers and arrive at an alternative to elastane. So we're partnering with North Carolina State University here in the United States, and we're working on textile and materials research and innovation. We have an innovation center there on campus where our teammates work alongside of researchers. So again, tying to both design choices and the materials that you make your products out of to help the pivot toward the circular economy.
Excellent. Okay, so we've just got 3 minutes left, and this is a big question, so I think we'll just get some very quick reactions to this. But as I mentioned earlier, thousands of policymakers, NGOs, and others are meeting in Paris right now around the Global Plastics Treaty. And policy obviously shapes the rules of the game for companies in the circular economy and sustainability more broadly. So I'd love just for an example from each of you quickly on what policy shift would you like to see that you think would actually help enable the circular economy? Maybe Josh, I'll start with you.
Probably the quickest thing I could think of would be standardizing data tracking. And earlier I mentioned how these companies need to be talking the same language to enable that tracking to be effective. And by doing so, I think that will be a great help by the government.
Excellent. Bob.
I heard something at University of Georgia a few years back on one of our visits, and they talked about this idea of from compliance to value. And in the waste collection systems, this idea, if you make me comply, I will do it the easiest way I can. So you put recycling out there, and I got landfill, and it costs me the same. I throw it in whatever bucket I can. The concept was done in an Asia Pacific city of saying, hey, if you bring it out, we have collection centers that are easy accessible, and based on the material and having it segregated in the weight, it will give you value, and it will reduce your overall waste management costs, if you will. It's an out-of-the-box thought, but I don't have all the answers, but it's that concept that says, how do we shift from compliance to value?
Yep, great. Michael?
I think a great practical application in policy would be recycling in a way, like looking at an example of EPR, extended producer responsibility, and collection schemes at how when companies in a particular place roll things out successfully, that can be scaled and kind of consistently rolled out, as opposed to policies emerging in many different jurisdictions where you have differences in even common terms like recyclability, and then you're left to kind of figure out how to implement in a place. So I think there's a real opportunity here to recycle what works at the implementation level of a policy that creates positive conditions.
Great. And Renee, just to sharpen it, like what policy change would support re-commerce?
Yeah,
if you had a magic wand.
There is one. So it's taxes, actually. There's a 1099-K form that there's a threshold that used to be at $20,000 for an individual to sell goods online. And if they hit that threshold, they got a 1099 form. So in 2021, they lowered the threshold. That's Congress, lowered the threshold to $600. So I, as a casual eBay user, could easily break that threshold. When you receive a 1099-K form in the mail, is this actually income? What do I do with it? Let's not make re-commerce more complicated. So we're encouraging Congress to put that level back up to something that is more reasonable and more user-friendly.
Excellent. Great. So with that, I want to close the panel just by thanking Renee, Michael, Bob, and Josh. Really amazing panel. I really appreciate the work you're doing and the thoughts you've shared. And thank you to the audience for tuning in to this panel. So thank you very much.